Ultimately, all junglers want to know which junglers to play and which junglers to put in their champion pool. So instead of going over 54 junglers and giving you which kind of source they are, I've put all of those junglers, literally every single one, into 3 archetypes. These archetypes will allow you to identify your personal playstyle, and after watching this video, if you want one of each in your champion pool, you will know what to pick. And if you simply want to stick to your basic archetype and pick 3 from that same pool, you will know what to pick. But what people struggle with picking in this regard is itemization on those champions, and for that we have the new Mobalytics Itemization 2.0 feature, designed to give you much more accurate data along with the meta, off-meta, and non-meta build paths, as well as detailed descriptions on adaptive itemization, very important when they're going around changing every single item. Additionally, you can have a look at what the best in the world and one tricks are doing from Korea and any other region to observe how they figure out the new tech on their champions. All of this updated and pushed live to the companion app where you can put it directly into your client, along with all of the pre-game tips, post-game tips, as well as in-game tips such as itemization notification, level spike awareness, tips on how to play your champion, how to counter the enemy team composition. So if you want to dominate on the best junglers in the best way with all of the best information and keep up to date with all of the new itemization changes as the meta develops, click the link in the description below to download Mobalytics today. So we are going to go with the Carnivore, Herbivore, and Omnivore junglers, but not in the way you know. We will be using the Korean baseline definition, which is a lot more clear and also allows for a lot more crossover with certain specific junglers, including the alpha junglers, which I will mention at the end. Now, essentially with these champions, what you're looking for is to feast on enemy champions and their bones. So yes, you are essentially trying to be a little bit like General Zod, but these are your quintessential early game junglers, your Rek'Sais, your Warwigs, species and champions that really want to accentuate the tempo control of the game, get themselves fed, get experience and gold ahead of enemy junglers and laners, and then close out earlier. Typically, their late games don't necessarily really scale very well, but as you'll see on the champion carousel, there are scaling junglers who really do accentuate this playstyle, and we will get into those a little bit later. You are looking to invade and gank like beasts only seen once in 100 million years. Well, maybe 65 million years because, you know. But you're looking to gank fast, gank often, invade hard, invade whenever you have the leverage of itemization, experience, and of course health resources. Now typically most of these champions have one very explicit thing in their kits. They have high base values and lesser scalings, which is what makes them early game junglers because they don't scale with itemization as well as other champions. You're looking to get ahead with your momentum, keep your lead with the copious amounts of aggressive plays to cover up for some of that late game weakness, which is pretty apparent through those scalings I just mentioned. Remember, your dynamic team fighting can show you a skill issue on these champions. Elise, Lee, Rek'Sai, Warwick, all of these champions are typically not late game focused, but they can be very good if they are ahead, and they can still control teamfights if the mechanics are good, but they're not inherently late game teamfighting gods. If you've watched my ganking videos and all the theoretical videos on how to jungle, and you are one of those with low ganking tempo, low early kill participation, and you're playing one of these carnivorous junglers, you're doing it wrong and most likely you're going to lose because you don't want to be behind too much, because if the enemy jungler is a scaler, you're not exactly a vector yourself, you're simply just an amorphous blob of golden experience from which they can extract. Now the gold income isn't always reliable, but that's okay because they scale more so with experience and itemization. Getting item spikes are great, getting item spikes are huge, but they love experience. Being level 5 when someone's level 4, being level 7 when someone's level 5. These are huge for them. Now, Rengar is one of these perfect examples. He is basically a scaling jungler. We'll talk about him in the Omnivore section, but he has his carnivore playstyle. He likes to be aggressive, taking out enemy junglers, ganking whenever he can, but intelligently playing for level 6. He's a fusion style. But like these other junglers that have higher base values in their kit, Rengar has a base value from his bone tooth. You stack that sucker up without itemization, and you're good to go. And then you give him itemization, and of course, things kind of get whooped for the enemy team. The effective goal here is to ensure you have a lead through aggressive pathing, 3 camps, 5 camps, invades, counter gank them early, do not AFK farm, and play safe. You need to suppress the enemy jungler such that your laners can exist righteously. If all your lanes are losing, you're playing a carnivorous jungler, which is what everybody always asks, yes, but I'm an early game jungler, and Virkayu, all my lanes are losing. Well, the enemy jungler can't gank every lane, and the enemy jungler most likely is just gonna be farming thinking, haha, I win, so those lanes should be gankable for you. Pick one, spam gank it, catch up, get plates, take the objective on that side while the enemy jungler's on the other side, and you're back in the game. But if that's happening to you every single game, it's because you are not tracking the enemy jungler properly, you are not having an aggressive first clear. Look at the video I just put out if you want to understand more on this, but it's absolutely quintessential that you know what to do in champion select with the carnivore jungler. And you don't want to give the enemy time and the mental fortitude to be able to realize their win conditions, and I mean that both in the sense of they recognize that they're going to get there, or that they actually get there. If you have a late game comp against you, you don't want to give them time to scale. If they're an early game comp, you also want to ensure you maintain the lead, because if they have the lead, they get to extend their win con. If you imagine your win condition is say 20 minutes as an early game jungler, every kill you get, every lead play you make, every objective you snag extends that win condition by a few minutes. So if the enemy comp is an early game comp and you're an early game comp and you both suck in the late game, but they get a huge lead, what's gonna happen? That's right, only pain.mp4. Track them, get an early game lead, and ensure you keep it. So when do you actually want to pick these champions? You want to pick carnivore junglers when your team can actually rally around the snowballing strategy. Having 3 scaling lanes can really help with regards to lane prio. This will obviously suck a little bit if you actually want to go on those invades of the enemy jungler, but in that case, you just gank the lanes, create the prio, now you can invade, now you can fall back to objectives. But even if those scaling lanes help you with easier ganks, if you have a certain pressure lane, say you've got a Renekton or something, that's a lane we can really play around and we can really snowball aggressively. But now instead of easy ganks, we're looking at dives. We're looking at preventing the enemy jungler from ganking our priority lanes. And that's the 2 sides of the carnivore coin. And yeah, we do really want those kill potential lanes I just mentioned. Those are the best ones. And then of course, objectives. Kills into objectives as much as you can. Translate that to other lanes. Make sure the enemy jungler doesn't get freebies by going into their jungle, now counter jungling, and then always fall back to your own camps. You really don't care for them as a priority. You want a high sense of urgency, every lane is your property, and the enemy jungle is your jungle. Like middle-age conquests. And as long as you're not like the Teutonic lead of Barbarossa, you should have absolutely no issue seeing success. And as a final footnote to some of the champions, you will notice they do have different playstyles. Yes, a Volibear, for example, and a Rek'Sai, they can full clear and farm a little bit more, but a Sylas and a Pantheon and an Elise, you're not necessarily going to be doing that, are you? So you've got to fuse those concepts together. And a lot of that is really covered in my jungle courses, that's why I made them, so you can basically adapt all of jungling theory to whatever champion you play, and it's yours forever, whenever I update it and change things to suit something if I have to, but ideally I've designed them to go for all time, on the fundamentals that carry you no matter the meta. However, if you're playing a herbivore jungler, you might also want to think deeply about whether you want to gank or farm. Now in this case, these junglers are also great at ganking, but not as much at dueling like the previous section. The other champions like to invade and really go fist you, but these champions really want to play around lane states much more. Your Ivans, your Rels now, your Sejuanis. Yeah, Zac can also kind of farm and do a lot of damage, and yeah, they can also kind of take these 1v1s when they have a huge lead. So yes, in fact, some can do some dueling, but that's not really what you want to accomplish. Your good gank is, you're not going to 1v1 at level 3, for example, over Scuttle Crabs. You want to use numbers advantage to throw off the carnivores in their search for prey and calories. Your pathing is about avoidance and also just making them chase you around the map. You really want them to make them feel they can't control you because you're basically saying, look, I know you're going to invade me, I'm just going to go dive bot lane and take a dragon. Now, some of them also have the benefit, as we unfortunately have seen for all time in professional play, that they farm until level 6. They do have strong ultimates and they do want to use smart pathing and use hugely strong atomization spikes, but some of them are just great at ganking and doing objectives like Nunu, and others are more reserved in their approach, farm reasonably well, and have very reliable ganks when the enemy jungler isn't nearby, or when they are counter ganking perhaps a carnivore jungler and their cooldowns are down, and they usually have a copious amount of CC, or in the case of Ivern, a Daisy and some shields, although he does technically have a root as well. Now, you won't out-invade the carnivores, you won't out-damage them, and you won't out-farm the next category, the Omnivores. So you have to be very active on the map without risk and understand that you're really the balanced jungler. And you yourself can 1v9, but you're not a carry jungler, yes? You are always going to amplify and try and make your team strong as well as yourself. If the enemy jungler has 1v9 capability, they're ahead. Your job won't be to out 1v9 him. Your job will be to identify what he's trying to 1v9. Is he trying to go on your ADC, your really fed mid lane mage? And how can you CC him, pick him off, and protect your team from him? You want to support your laners, give them advantages through map control, vision, and crowd control, and if you're Nunu, a nice song on the flute while you wait for the enemy to respawn after your 10th gank from the river. Understand team win conditions and play to it. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but I do talk a little bit about it in the video I just released, as I mentioned. You are not the win condition at all in terms of, hey, funnel the gold into me, but look at it objectively. Hey, you got a Yasuo, cool. You got a Vayne, you've got an Aphelios, you've got someone playing Ezreal who's actually good at the champion, which is only really true of their challenger. Who is the 1v9 carry that has a gankable lane that you can use to force the enemy jungler to feel a little bit desperate? You want to prevent the enemy carnivore junglers from basically taking everything from the map. And if you're against an omnivore jungler, you don't want to let them AFK farm while you don't exactly exert the pressure that will force them to stop, farming. And as always, my friends, repeat ganks and objectives are absolutely your friend. Use them well, identify vision control, and essentially play your own game, use avoidance, track like a savant, and straight up, you're going to have an absolutely good time, provided, of course, you can teamfight. To help with that, as I will link in the description below and put in the top right, I've made the ultimate teamfighting guide for junglers. You're welcome. Finally, we have the most fully packed archetype, the Omnivores. This is a really difficult class to nail down, but essentially, these are the ones who will take over and 1v9 games. These are the ones who can AFK farm and play around their ult, scale into the late game, and just win by not doing very much if the enemy jungler doesn't use their carnivore or herbivore style correctly. They have sublime farm control. Now, they're not always farming junglers, but all of them will have a ramp up farm time. Some are really strong at farming early through late, some are a little bit slow to begin but will ramp up 100%. In the end, 7.5 CS per minute plus is extremely easy when you do it properly, when you jungle properly with these champions. You have intelligent pathing combined with healthy clears, strong damage potential, but you're not necessarily going to be fighting a Rek'Sai early. We'll try and avoid, we'll just farm a kind of jungle ourselves, we'll gank lanes that are gankable. You want to have the right amount of ganks. You don't want to be AFK farming, you still want to have good ganking cadence, but it's less about the amount and it's more about picking the exact moment. You want to have less ganks so you can make sure you're getting your experience, but you want those ganks to be of a higher quality. Choose your spots wisely. Some can duel like a carnivore, but have situational ganking due to the nature of their kits. For example, Yi has no CQC, so you're only really going to rotate to the ganks in situations that have an 80% chance of success. Rengar kind of needs bushes, he's not just going to walk in through the lane without his ultimate, it looks kind of funky. But Rengar is again a little bit carnivorous in his playstyle. He doesn't want to AFK farm, Karthus does, Hecarim does. So it's not always an exact science. For example, Vi is technically a carnivore jungler and she loves that level 6 spike. Yeah, she can kind of farm a little bit and she can take over a game, but that's not really what she is. She is still someone that's a bit of an enabler once you get into the late game. So she's kinda here, but she's mostly a carnivore jungler. Essentially what you're getting from this is the summary in the text box on your screen. Those are the champions we're talking about here. If you think your champion falls into this archetype, you can 1v9 take over games. In addition to looking for those opportunistic ganks I mentioned, a lot of these champions, almost all of them, have very, very strong level 6 spikes. So the onus is on getting that spike as early as possible. Farm ult, farm ult. You can play around those things. If you're a champion that has a bit more of a carnivorous style, like a Kindred and a Rengar, then between those farms and those ults, you can go ahead and suppress the enemy jungler, push them out, and of course at the moment, Kindred is just basically sneeze and you win. Yes, you might run the risk of giving up dragons. You don't really want to give up a herald, but you might have to give one up and take a dragon instead. Counter jungling is always very good. Essentially, you are kind of relaxed, aren't you? You don't want to be behind too much, but if there's someone who's going to spam gank, what you cannot do is let them rope you into playing their game. Don't. Sequence, counter jungle, take advantages elsewhere. If they're investing a lot of time somewhere, that means somewhere else is free. If they want to do a dragon and you can't really contest it, you're better served taking their whole top side, or just doing another full sequence and ganking top lane. It's all about golden experience and getting it as fast as possible. If something compromises that, it's not a good decision. Again, the last video, non-decision making, that's why I made that. So is this a little bit weaker to the carnivore nature? Well, technically yes, it does sound like that, but it has one huge caveat. Because you are more malleable, you can afford to farm well in losing game states. You don't have to force yourself out of bad situations. You aren't tied to your early game ganking success. You have the ability to farm a lot more than the meat eaters of the jungle. And you have a lot stronger level 6 as you get into the late game, and your team fighting technically is a lot more supreme. So every time there's a failed gank by the carnivore or the herbivore, and the jungler loses camps and objectives to you, you're winning. Every time the carnivores and herbivores try to counter gank you, invade you, take you out of the game so you can't scale, and they fail because of your savant pathing, your 200 Q vision control, guess what? You're winning. And even if you do die once or twice, you can always get back into the game through 1 or 2 plays. That's the beauty of these champions. They don't need to get ahead. But if they do, you bring the late game to the mid game. You bring the mid game to the early game sometimes. If you get fed like a carnivore jungler through carnivore jungler playstyle because you can do it, and yes, even Karthus can do that with an exhaust, invade, fast fall, clear, all of a sudden the game is totally within your hands and the enemy comp who doesn't have a late game win con has to just yield to the almighty power of the ring you very clearly have in your pocket. Usually, if you want to smurf, you're playing one of these junglers because, again, if you path well and know the damage profile, you could snowball pretty easily. They require strong game knowledge, strong tracking, solid mechanics. They are viable in almost any game, but you do give up some of that lane pressure. You might give up some of those objectives. You don't always have the best, hey, listen, laner, I'm going to play around you. You can, but you want them to play around you. And if you can shut down any other jungler type, if you can get yourself more fed than them by 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, hey, you're winning a league and you're probably winning at life. And on that note, I mentioned Rengar twice, I mentioned Kindred twice. These kind of champions are just your alpha meta. They can be whatever you want them to be. Graves and Kayn can also be this depending on what kind of meta there is. They're omnivores but can be carnivores. They can also play a lot more passive and still scale. There's always a window to play, and this does depend on balance and meta strength. And there you might think, hey, Kha'Zix is in the meta. Yes, but Kha'Zix, while he can do carnivore style jungling, really is an omnivore because he doesn't necessarily want to run in, invade, and compromise himself. An assassin, and specifically assassins within the omnivore type, against certain comps can actually have a harder style if they don't get ahead. If they fall behind, they only need to get itemization. You can be 2, 10, and 3 as an assassin, get your golden itemization through the game going long, and you're back in it. But now you're kind of basing it on the enemy being incapable. And so essentially you are those snowballers as well. Some of the assassins in this particular type will not necessarily be great at scaling, they will not be better at team fighting, and you do want to end by 25, like for example a Talon. Others will be better later in the game, like your Rengars and maybe even your Kha'Zixes, because of their kits, their shiftiness, their ability to split push, team fight differently. All of these things play into the specific champion that you have, and that's the sort of differentiating factor within the Omnivore archetype. Your Karthus scales just by existing. Your Kindred doesn't. Your Kindred needs to scale through snowballing. Your Karthus can obviously do that as well, but he doesn't need to. Carnivores snowball, but the snowball doesn't get very big. Omnivore snowball, but it gets absolutely huge. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. But there you have it, a summary of 3 different archetypes. Which one do you prefer to play? And regardless of what archetype you are playing, your jungle decision making needs to be simplified so that you can make sure every game becomes true LP God gains. All you have to do is click the box on your screen right now.